Well, it's good to be with you all today. Looking forward to talking about this topic, gospel-shaped sending church. Let me start with this. I think maybe a number of you grew up in a church. If you're like me, you grew up in a small conservative Baptist church. And one of my earliest memories of missions comes from being in that church, in that Baptist church. I remember going into the lobby of our church building, and in that lobby was a big world map, and there were little light bulbs on that map. And as a kid, you could press that button right on the sort of the right side of the big world map, and all the little light bulbs would light up. And there were some on every continent. And each of those light bulbs signified a missionary that was supported or sent out from our church to do missions, to spread the gospel. So little light bulbs all over that world map. And so from an early age, as a kid, I understood that meant missions is important. Churches do missions. We should be about missions. And that's held true for every single church I've been in. I don't know what churches you are a part of or you got connected to whenever you became saved, or what churches you are at now, but I would imagine almost every one of you are part of churches that care about missions, talk about missions in some way. Now, I don't think they've got a cool light-up world map like my Baptist church, but usually there's a pamphlet, there's something on a website, some way of signifying, here's the missions that we're involved with. Here are the missionaries we have sent out. Here are the missionaries that we support. This is what we do. I don't think that's a controversial statement, that churches should be about missions, that we should be supporting missionaries. But today what I want to do is ask a deeper question. And that deeper question is really this. Yeah, we do missions, but how should we do it? How should we do missions? More specifically, how might the gospel direct and shape how we do missions? Like I said, the title of this is Gospel-Shaped Sending Church. So what does that look like? We're convinced that we should do missions, but is there maybe a particular way we should do missions, things that we should prioritize, things that we should emphasize in how we do missions, but particularly out of that understanding of being a gospel-shaped sending church. So to do that, we begin by talking a bit about what it means to be a gospel-shaped church. If we're going to be sending, we've got to understand what it means to be gospel-shaped church. And so when I talk about the gospel, of course, I'm talking about this message, what we call the good news about what God has done for us in Jesus Christ and all that he has for us in Jesus Christ. It's a message of good news that involves our salvation and redemption by faith alone in Jesus. It involves the fact that we've been adopted into the family of God. It involves the fact that we're going to be glorified one day and restored. There'll be restoration in all of creation. So this is a message that we, of course, believe in. This is a message that we proclaim. But the gospel, it's also a message that shapes who we are, the kind of people that we want to be. And so it's just important to say that because we shouldn't look at the gospel as if, here's a message that we like, almost like a Facebook post or a tweet. So like you're scrolling through your feed and you see, oh, I like this. It's about Jesus. I agree with that. I like it, and then you go on to your next thing. Right? The gospel, this message, is more than just something that we like and approve of. It's also something that shapes who we are. In fact, it's the message is a way of understanding what kind of community we want to be. It's a way of speaking to how we want to look like and act like. So if that's true, then how should we look like? What does it look like? What does a gospel-shaped church particularly look like? And there's a lot of different ways we could speak to that and describe that, but the way that I'm particularly drawn to is conveniently enough a metaphor that we find in the Bible. And so when I think of a gospel-shaped church, the metaphor I think that especially resonates for me is that the gospel-shaped church is like a light in a dark world. So the gospel-shaped church, the imagery, I think the Bible, one of the images the Bible wants to convey to us is that to be shaped by the gospel, to have been changed by the gospel, this message we believe in, what it looks like is that we are a light, particularly a light in a dark world. And so think about that metaphor. Again, it describes what we're like, but especially what we're like in the context in which we are still in, which is the world. So let me just walk through a couple different passages to elaborate on this. Ephesians 5, 7-10. Therefore, do not become partners with them. For one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. So notice, once you were darkness, so that's without the gospel, then now there's a change. We're no longer the same. Now that we've believed in the gospel, we are now light. Right? Once darkness, now light. We believed in the gospel. There's a fundamental change in who we are and what we look like. And the Bible uses that imagery of light. But notice, too, it says we are light in the Lord. So we're light only to the degree in which we are now in the Lord. John 1, verses 4-5, it says, in him, in Jesus, was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So Jesus is the light. He comes into our life, and because he comes into our life, we become lights. Like we're the outer casing, the light source is Jesus. And so that directly connects into how we're going to live. I mean, we're lights only because we're in Jesus. We shine only because of who Jesus is. Because of who Jesus is, that's why we can talk about a distinctive way in which we are, a way in which we want to be, a way in which we want to be like, how we actually live. That's directly affected to now the change that's happened in us. So going back to Ephesians chapter 5, walk then as children, verse 8, walk as children of light. Once darkness, now light. Walk in accordance with who you are. And the Bible, very helpfully, to make it clear, says, and here's some ways this looks like. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. So, to be shaped by the gospel of Jesus Christ, this imagery of being a light, it looks like something. It looks like approving what is good and right and true, in contrast to what we've done before, maybe approve what is not good, what is not right, what is not true, what is false. So we're living now in accordance with who we are. Philippians 2, verses 14-15. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. So notice the contrast again here, that we were darkness, we were part of this crooked and twisted generation, but now we shine as lights in the world, and that looks like something. That the gospel, this message we now believe in, shapes how we are within the world, that we're now the call to be blameless and innocent, without blemish. There's a distinctiveness to how we live and how we act. 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 4-5. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. Now, here's what you are. You are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. So again, the contrast. You've believed in Jesus, this message of good news, of what God has done in Jesus Christ. You've believed in it. You're different now. You've changed. You've been shaped by it. This idea of this, again, that's why we're using that phrase, gospel shaped. We've been shaped by Jesus. In fact, we now are in Jesus, such that we can be called something different. And then that imagery of we are now light. Philippians 5, verses 14-16. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Now, right here, and I think through all this, I'm sort of building a case here that there's something inherent now to who we are. And that passage particularly sort of speaks to this idea of like we're a light, and that has an impact on the situation that we're in, the world that we're in. And I think maybe now you can easily see how this relates to missions, to sending. If we're now in Jesus, if we have a life that's shaped by the fact that we're in Jesus, such that we can be described as lights, then automatically, I want to say there's a sense of sendingness to the church. Just by virtue of the fact of who we are now, that we're in Christ. And I want to add in the ways in which the Bible wants to describe what it is for us to be in Jesus. It uses that metaphor of being a light. And one of my strong beliefs is that the Bible is very intentional about the metaphors that it uses. It uses a lot of different metaphors. Think about the ways in which the Bible describes the church, for example. The Bible could describe the church in a lot of different ways, yet it chooses imagery of family, of body. They could have said, you're like a group of merchants together. No, it doesn't say that. It uses family, right? It uses body. That's intentional for us understanding what the church is. Similar here, the metaphor the Bible uses to describe who the church is, especially in the context of the world, is light. And you think about light, well, what's the light meant to do? It's meant to shine in darkness. That's what its purpose is. The lights aren't meant to shine in lamp stores. Right? It's missed its calling in life. All it ever does is shine with a bunch of other lights around it. It especially resonates when a light shines in darkness. That we aren't lights if the only time we're really being a light is if you're gathered with other Christians on Sunday morning. If that's your only expression of it, then there's something missing there. So just by virtue of who we are, inherent to being shaped by the gospel, by being in Jesus, has a sense that we go out. That the world, then, as we look at the world, it's not a place to avoid. It's not a place to even be afraid of. It's a place that we can't help but want to go out because, what? We are lights. We're called to be lights. Lights shining with the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's why it says, again, Matthew 5:16, let your light shine before others. You're a light, and it can't help but be sent out to shine before others. And so when I talk about gospel-shaped church, I want to argue that inherent to that, inherent to being shaped by the gospel, inherent to what it means to be now in Jesus, no longer darkness, now light, now in Jesus, inherent to that is that we are a gospel-sending church. The gospel-shaped church, your very identity can't help but be about sending out. About sending out. And so I want to press a little bit more into this and say, I think we can also say how that looks like. I suggest that we are a gospel-shaped church is inherently a gospel-sending church. I think we can speak about sending out in some particular ways in keeping with the way the Bible describes us, that we're lights. So two of the ways I'm going to be looking at, that we want to shine broadly. The gospel-shaped sending church seeks to shine broadly. But secondly, the gospel-shaped sending church seeks to shine brightly. You want to shine broadly, you want to shine brightly. So think about that first one. The gospel-shaped sending church shines broadly. Inherent to who we are, we want to send ourselves out. We want to send others, we want to be sent out. And we want to, and this is a way of capturing the sense that we are to go to all nations, Matthew 28, that we are to go to the ends of the earth, Acts 1:8. So this is not coming out of thin air. This is Jesus himself. Implied in what Jesus is saying is that we got to go places. And the metaphor of who we are, that we are lights, sort of helps us think this way. A light looks for dark places. So to be a local church is to say, where are the dark places? It's almost this idea of constantly pulsing out. That we want to find the places that are still in dark, our job is not done as a church if there's still dark places that have not had the light of Jesus shining in them. And we are the lights. So we go out. We don't, it's not like we are sending missile strikes of light. No, we are the light itself. We have to go ourselves. We have to send others who are themselves light in Jesus to shine in those places. So we want to shine broadly. In view of that, though, I want to sort of suggest if that's true, there's 6 practical implications to help us be broad, shining lights that I think are, I'll put it this way. I think these are things I would encourage us to think about, especially as we think of missions beyond our borders. So here's what I have in mind, this idea of broad shining. What does that look like? What are some things that should prioritize and we should be emphasizing? Again, in keeping with this idea that what we are is lights, which is to say that we are in the Lord, that we're shaped by this gospel message. So 6 practical implications. Number 1, check my time here. Number 1, we have to be about reaching people. We have to be about reaching people. I want to argue that broad light shining has to be people-centric. That a gospel-shaped sending church emphasizes people. Notice it says to shine before others. People, human beings. So this is nothing against building projects, and other similar things. I want to be very clear about that. I'm not speaking against those type of things. However, I think we should be concerned if our gospel sending does not involve actually connecting with people. The less that happens, then I think the less we're actually being what the gospel shapes us to be. Right? Lights, and lights are meant to shine before people. The light of Jesus is designed to shine in the lives of people. So everything we do should serve that purpose. We should see a connection to that. Not to say we can't do other things, but the purpose, the main deal for, again, if I'm right that the gospel shapes who we are, and inherent to that as we send out, we should be about people. We should be people-centric. Our missions should be people-centric. That's one. Number two, we have to be about all people and all people everywhere. We have to be about all people and all people everywhere. This is a quote from Eckhart Schnabel, Early Christian Mission, 2-volume work, which I am kicking myself that I forgot to put on my recommended book list. So let me just give a shout out to my boy Eckhart Schnabel. 2 volumes, Early Christian Mission, brilliant. I mean, just thorough biblical look at everything that relates to mission for the early church. So in his book, in that 2-volume work, he says this: the early church proclaimed the gospel to all people, to Jews and pagans, slaves and free, rich and poor. There is no evidence for a strategy that took into account social or cultural identities and peculiarities for the effectiveness of church planning efforts. You understand what that means? That means that, I would argue, being shaped by the gospel means that we go out into dark places to reach the people that are there, all the people who are there, as much as possible. That there is, I would argue, nothing to suggest in the Bible that it's okay for us to go in an area and say, I'm really only here to reach the elites. Right? I'll wait for someone else to do that. Yeah, I'm not against strategies and thoughtfulness and say we're going to sort of focus here for this particular season or whatever else it is. But again, if it's to shine in the dark places, that means it's more, I would argue, gospel-sending church sends to places and seeks as much as possible to shine as thoroughly in those places as possible, an all-people type of strategy. I know that speaks against some of the ways in which people have done things, even some of the success we've had, but I think the success ends up building churches that aren't as fully robustly church as they can be. To be fully robustly church is to connect people across all sorts of barriers. This is why it's interesting. I think if Paul, if the early church was planning Rome, the Roman church today, they would have gotten advice from a lot of different places to say, well, hey, you, Peter, you're really good at reaching the Jews, so you go and reach the Jews there. And then, Paul, you're going to reach the Gentiles. You start a Gentile-only church. So we got a Jew Christian church, we got a Gentile church, and you all come together on Christmas, right, to show that we're together. That's not what they did. There's one church, the Roman church. In that church are Greek Jews, are Greek Christians, Gentile Christians, and there's also Jewish Christians. And there's tensions there, no doubt. There's tensions, there's issues. The assumption is we're planning a church for this city, and we want to see people reached within this city together, connected together. Does that make sense? So we got to be about people, and we got to be about all people. We also have to be about all people everywhere. Again, from Eckhart Schnabel, he talks about how he sort of traces this. Philip goes to, it says, all the towns of Samaria, Acts 8. Paul goes to the cities of the Mediterranean world. I mean, his missionary team, Paul's missionary team was so tight, so good at what they did, so expansive in what they were doing. We're told in Acts 19 that all the residents of Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks. I don't think that's an exaggeration. Everyone had heard something of this Jesus. And so gospel-shaped sending church, I think, and Paul, of course, has his intention to go further, to even go to Spain. We have early Christian tradition that speaks of Thomas going to India. So as sending, if we're shaped by the gospel, I think broad light sending, which is to say we should be as thorough as possible. Think again of Jesus. Here's another example. Where does he go? He goes to the towns and villages. He goes to all the peoples, outcast, poor, wealthy. I'm going to quote John Piper here on this. The task of missions may not be merely to win as many individuals as possible from the most responsive people groups of the world, but rather to win individuals from all the people groups of the world. Matthew 5, to give light to all in the house. Of course, there's strategy in how we might do this in the sending process, but I want to say The strategy that should compel us, that should be a priority for us, is where there are still dark places. Where are the people who have not had the light, who are unreached, where are the places where the light is pretty dim? How might we shine the light more? So we want to be about all people everywhere. Number 3, we must be about Jesus. We must be about Jesus. So Peter and John, before the Sanhedrin in Acts 4, these guys are telling them, you all got to stop talking about Jesus. Peter and John are like, oh, we're not doing that. Acts 4, he says, and there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. So the apostles are convinced the only way people can be saved and changed is for them to hear about Jesus. That's the only way it's going to happen. So again, thinking of this metaphor of a light, the light that we are sending out, that we're shining out, is the light of the gospel that is about Jesus. So in whatever we do, we should prioritize people connecting to Jesus. That's got to be the priority. Again, this is not to say we shouldn't have strategy and wisdom in this. I'm not suggesting to go into closed countries and evaluating the ministries in closed countries. How quickly are they passing out tracts on the Middle Eastern streets of Saudi Arabia? I'm not saying that. There's wisdom and strategy in this, but it is to say, being circumspect, all those things. But it is to say that as a priority, whatever we do, however we do it, I'd say at the center of it, what should drive us, what should motivate us, is people being connected to Jesus. To be shaped by the gospel, to be shaped by Jesus. And so what we're sending out should be Jesus. Again, think of some of the things that are happening, great things that are happening in mission work. There's community development projects, there's language translation, there's seminary training. Great, as long as it serves the purpose of people being connected to Jesus. That's what drive all those things, I would argue. Especially if we're thinking of dark places, a priority for us, if we're to be a gospel-shaped sending church, is people connecting to Jesus. Number 4, the local church is always key. It should always occupy the prime place. So again, I'm quoting from Eckhart Schnabel. He talks about how one of the things you see very, very quickly is how as the gospel comes forth and people believe in Jesus, come into Jesus, are brought together in Jesus, communities of believers are established. And that flows out of, Jesus himself says, you got to go and make disciples of Jesus, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded you, baptizing them in my name. So for that to happen, people are going to be connected together. It's not going to happen in the synagogue. They don't like that kind of stuff in the synagogue. So automatically, we see people connected in local church communities. So there's the evidence of it. And again, I think it drives out of who we are, that we are light. But we are light particularly in connection with one another. I'm going to say our light shines most especially in the context of believers. So it's not just you're a believer in Jesus individually. We're believers in Jesus together as a community of people. And so as we think of gospel-shaped sending, I would say a priority for how we think through that and our strategies for that should be the local church. Should be about people being connected to local church. We have not done our job if all we're doing is shining the light of Jesus and people are beginning to believe it, and we say, all right, we're good, and we move on. We want to see people believing in Jesus, and as they're changed, and as they too become light in Jesus Christ, they're connected with other people in local churches. All right, number 5. We want the light of Jesus to shine such that people believe and are converted. We want the light of Jesus to shine such that people believe and are converted. I think we should be concerned if our sending, our gospel-shaped sending, involves mission work that it's administrative, it's all these other things, and it begins to get away from conversion. And I'm using that word very deliberately. I know that's an unpopular word in some circles. I think it's an awesome word. We want people to be converted. Darkness to light. There's no other way to describe that but to say conversion. That's what it is. It's conversion. It's people changing fundamentally who they are. And I would say missions should always put a priority on that. Again, there's lots of other things that that missions do and that are good and important. I just want to argue a priority of place. In the same way like the previous point, that the local church should occupy the prime place, I want to say if we're the light of Jesus, a prime place should always be for us, a prime motivation for what we're doing, something that should be on your top 3 goals for sending people out is that we want to see people converted. We want to be part of efforts to see people converted. God's going to bear the fruit. There may be proclamation and engagement of communities where it doesn't seem like there's any fruit, right, happening for a long time. God is going to be the one who converts people, but our passion, our prayer should be for seeing people converted. To be a sending church, I want to argue, a gospel-shaped sending church, we got to care about seeing people go from darkness to light, people believing and converting. Number 6, we want the light of Jesus to shine in a way that shows what it looks like to become light in the Lord. We want the light of Jesus to shine in a way that shows what it actually looks like to now be light in the Lord. Another way to put this is, in our gospel sending, we should have in mind that we want to be demonstrating and embodying Jesus. So, I mean, this flows from really where we begin with, this idea of that we're not just talking to people about Jesus. We want to be Jesus in all the broad areas in which you're shining the light of Jesus. We want to show the distinctiveness of what it is to be Jesus, and that's going to be contextually different. It's going to be different in India versus Eastern Europe versus Iceland versus South Florida versus wherever your location is. That some of the distinctiveness might manifest itself in different ways. But I think what we have in mind is that we want to be among people. We want to send people out in a way that allows them to see. This is not just something we believe and talk about. This is something that we are. We are Jesus. We are in Jesus now. So that leads me to that second part that I was talking about before when I said that the gospel-shaped sending church shines broadly. And so those are sort of 6 practical implications, I would argue. If that metaphor is true, to shine broadly, 6 practical implications for us to faithfully do that. Here's some ways for us to now think about what it means for us to shine brightly. And that last point sort of is just, I want to sort of draw that out even more. That there is, as I was saying, distinctiveness to who we are in Jesus in the different locations that we're in. Think of it as light beams that come out from us being in Christ, the light source that is Jesus. And I want to describe some of these light beams. Let me just, again, sort of prove this point from passage here, Matthew chapter 5. We read this before, let me read it again. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So the gospel of Jesus shapes us to be this contrast community, right? So we are now light, and that light is meant to shine before others. And what does that look like? It's good works. So there's something that comes out of us being light in Jesus. But it's not just generic good works. Notice it says there's good works in a way that allows people to distinctly understand that this is coming from God. We do good works in a way that are praiseworthy of God. That our good works should look different, should feel different than the good works that come from, I don't know, the Red Cross, right? Or from a justice mission or whatever else it is. I believe in common grace. God is using those organizations for his glory. But there is something different about us being light in Jesus. And again, so this is where the gospel sending this comes out of. I think there's a way in which we shine before others. There's an impetus then for us to be a certain way, to live and act in a certain way in front of others that allows them to see Jesus and give praise to the glory of God, and ultimately by God's grace be connected to Jesus. And so this one too, I want to say, I was talking about broadly the light of the gospel of Christ shining out broadly. Here I'm just describing it shining out brightly. Broadly, one of the ways you most immediately think about it is sort of beyond our borders. Here's a way of thinking of how we are a gospel-shaped sending church locally. I think this applies especially locally. I mean, of course, broadly, we want people to be distinctly of Jesus, shine Jesus in the context they're in. But if you think about, if I'm understanding shine before others, that's not just for the missionaries we send out. We as local churches, and might say the local missions that we're doing, we got to be before others. We want to distinctly be before others, again, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father. So this is not just for Christians living outside of the United States. This is for us in every space that we're in. So what does that look like? We sort of suggest a couple things here. How gospel-shaped living, a gospel-shaped church looks like, and some might say the distinctly bright ways in which we want to look. So I've got a couple here, and I'm going to just quickly go through. but 8 different ways that I can think of. There's others, and I'm not going to take time for the sake of time explaining each of these. I'll just comment on a few of them. Here's ways in which I think, if we're a gospel-shaped sending church, one of the ways we want to distinctly do that, the light beams that should come out from us. Number one, I think we are distinctly bright. The light of Jesus shines most distinctly brightly when we are a loving church in contrast to a self-focused world. When we are a loving church in contrast to a self-focused world. We are in a world today that is incredibly focused on yourself. Everything around you wants to say, pay more attention to yourself. Your phone tells you, pay more attention to yourself, and nurtures you in that. One of the ways I think we most especially send out the light of Jesus and shine a light that people will notice is when we are loving. And to be loving with the love of Christ, which is not self-focused, but self-giving. It's self-sacrificing. That's distinct, isn't it? So we want to send ourselves out in that way. Of course, broadly, beyond our borders, but here's a way of giving, I think, a mission impetus to our local churches. We want to love in ways that people see and say that this is different. It's the light of Jesus in us. Number 2, when we are a gracious church. When we're a gracious church in contrast to a quid pro quo, eye for an eye world. A gracious church in contrast to a quid pro quo, eye for an eye world. Grace is amazing. Giving people what they don't deserve and could never earn. How often does that happen? Everywhere around, it's sort of, you do this, and I'll give you this. People are in marriages like that. People are in workplaces like that. People are in sports teams, in schools like that. The church demonstrates something entirely different. If we are shaped by Jesus, we believe in this message of good news, it shapes us so that we are known as a gracious people. And imagine that. Imagine experiencing that. People giving of themselves with no thought of return. And that's a distinctly bright light that we can be that I think gives more of a sense of sendingness to our people, again, especially locally, but certainly broadly. Number 3, when we are a generous church in contrast to a stingy world, everywhere around us tells us, you don't have enough, get more. Imagine what it is for people to encounter this particular light beam of Jesus, generosity. Generously giving for the sake of others, giving of our time, our resources, our energy, generous with our homes. Again, this is where I don't have take a time, but you look at the early church record, church history is full of all these examples and of the surrounding culture, not sure what to do with it. Like, what are these people doing? The generosity and the graciousness and the lovingness. They can't handle it. They can't understand it. Again, a distinctive light. It's not to say there weren't other ways in which people were helping one another in the ancient world, but there's something distinctly different about Christians because, again, we're not darkness anymore. We're light. We're light in the Lord. Number 4, when we are a truth-telling, truth-doing church in contrast to a confused, relativistic world. When we speak truth, we're willing to do truth in a world that is uncomfortable with saying, no, this is what's absolutely true. Number 5, when we are a righteous and justice-seeking church, in contrast to an unrighteous and unjust world. We speak to what's right and we stand for what's right. When we care about justice and all the different areas that are happening in our world, and we care for it in a way that is qualitatively different, not in a way that are self-serving, but we see justice in this cosmic sense of what God is doing in this world, especially in a world that so often is unwilling to look at, in a world that's so willing to accommodate unjust things and unrighteous things. That's a distinct light beam of the church. That's a way in which we send ourselves out, and particularly in our culture today, that people would notice, that would speak to again, who we are, that we are now light in Jesus. Number 6, when we are a peaceful church in contrast to a chaotic world, over there's things that make you feel like you're out of control, the church, a particular light beam of Jesus that comes from us being in Jesus Christ is that we have peace, the peace that surpasses understanding. In this world you'll have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. The peace I give you, the peace of Jesus that's able to face trouble and still be at peace. This next one follows closely behind that. Number 7, when we are a joy-filled church in contrast to a despairing world that has trouble dealing with suffering. When we are a joy-filled church in contrast to a despairing world that has trouble dealing with suffering. To be gospel-shaped sending church is to go out into the world and to suffer in front of people. And to suffer well in front of people. I mean, joy is a way of capturing that. What it is for us to have joy, no matter what's going on around us, whether we have a lot or we have a little. There's one, I think, thing that is particularly compelling for the Christian message that we have, that is part of us being sent out, this light that we have in Jesus, is to show what it is to know how to suffer. And people don't know how to do it. They're overwhelmed by it. It's why when there's terrorist attacks or other things that happen in our country, like the churches are filled. People are looking for something, right? They don't go to sports stadiums for that. Right? They don't go to their insurance agent for that. It's amazing how people resonate and aim for these things, but then they lose it, don't they? Because what they need to hear is, no, this isn't just, you're not just getting sort of a Band-Aid on this. To really deal with the world that we're in, you need Christ, right? So part of being gospel-shaped sending church, I would argue, is to show how we can have joy no matter what's happening, no matter what we think is coming or what has come. Lastly, when we are a united church in contrast to a divided world. No surprise that we are increasingly tribal and divided in our world. Amazing that there is something that can actually bring people together and keep them together and keep them like really together, like family, like a body. It's Jesus, right? The light of Jesus. And so here's one of the ways in which, again, what I'm describing is what the church should be. And I'm just saying there's a sendingness to that. That one of the things that if we're light in Jesus, that particular quality should be shined in front of others. And so we should be conscious of wanting to have local churches that reflect that, and then to display that to the world that's around us, to shine that out in our local context, and of course broadly as well. Here's one of the distinctive ways in which we brightly shine the light of Jesus. So in all this, I mean, I've said a lot, but if there's one thing I want you to walk away with is this, that what holds us together, what binds us all together, what empowers us and makes this real is the fact that we are in the Lord, that we're in the Lord. There's my, I mean, you didn't have to sit through the whole thing. I could just told you that. Right? What I'm really talking about is, what does it mean for us to be in Jesus? The more you understand that, the more we press into that, it can't help but then push us out to be, Jesus is about engaging this world. If you understand what it is to be in Jesus, it's not about being in anything else but Jesus. It can't help but push us out, but also it can't help but push us out in distinctly Jesus-like ways, in all the ways that I've been talking about. So thank you guys for coming.